So I'm here with Jelincic, who is one of two candidates for the open seat on CalPERS board, and it is Friday, a little bit after 9 o'clock. Thank you for coming in. So let's get right to it. What role, if any, do you think placement agents have in assisting CalPERS carry out its responsibility to members?
One has to understand what placement agents are. I mean, they are essentially commissioned salesmen. And so particularly for smaller managers, they actually make some sense. Because if I'm a small money manager, I want to be managing money. I don't want to be out hustling accounts. So I hire somebody to do it. Larger firms typically have employees who do that. Obviously, Apollo is one of the exceptions. So I think that they actually have a role of helping people market their service. I think the problem we have is when they start dealing directly with the board members. And one of the weaknesses in PERS is that the board members, by and large, don't have investment experience. And so when they're talking to a salesman, they tend to be more susceptible. I was talking to someone and I made the analogy that when CalPERS buys an investment service, what we're doing is we're buying a service, we're buying expected return, and we're negotiating over costs. If you call up a mutual fund and are trying to enroll there, you really don't know and don't particularly care how the person on the other end of the phone is being paid. What you care about is the expected performance and what the fees are. And that's what PERS has done. Now, because it became a big issue in New York, which is a unique situation because they have a single fiduciary who gets to pick the managers, and so some bribes were being paid, and that came out. PERS with 13 named fiduciaries is, it's more difficult to bribe 13 people even if you wanted to. We've actually gone and said, hey, tell us about your placement agents. And that's actually how this Villalobos thing has come out. I have argued for years that we have paid too much for money managers. And what Villalobos did was give me 70 million proofs that we paid too much.
Here's a quote from Rob Fechner that's made the rounds in the media. And this was from a letter that he wrote, I believe, to other board members. If there is one inescapable conclusion from all we have seen this year regarding placement agents, their firms and employers, it is this. Just as lobbyists attempt to influence legislative or administrative decisions, placement agents attempt to influence the investment of state pension funds. Do you agree with that statement?
Yes. I mean, they are, as I said, they are commissioned salesmen, so yes, they're going to attempt to influence.
Is there a problem then when former CalPERS executives or former board members become placement agents?
I don't know that there's necessarily a problem, although I think that people have to be careful to make sure that they're not using their inside information.
There's legislation that I guess is in the works that would require placement agents to register as lobbyists, and that would prohibit investment firms from paying agents on commission or contingency when a deal gets done. Are those changes that you think are necessary?
I think I don't know if they're necessary, but they're certainly changes that would help. And that particular bill is actually being sponsored by CalPERS. CalPERS is really very transparent. I mean, we put every transaction out there. Now, obviously, we do it on a delayed time, and we don't broadcast it beforehand, because otherwise people will front run you. But we put a lot of information out there. We put our holdings out, we put every single transaction out there. And in that sense, I think I don't know how much more transparent we can be.
Are there other things like placement agent fees that you think, and that perhaps as a board member, should you be elected to the board, that you would like to see the board pursue to make more public or investigate?
Yeah, there are a couple of internal things that I think we need to look at. One, PERS, like much as I think has a nepotism problem, and I think we really ought to take a look at just how many relatives we have hired. But one of the other areas where we have a problem is the health benefits side. When you deal with people all the time, you develop a certain comfort level with them and a certain rapport. And I think as people have stayed in health benefits too long, they begin to identify more and more with the vendors. One of the things I have said is that we need to rotate people through there. You need to leave them there long enough that they develop some expertise, but you need to also make sure that there's enough fresh blood coming in so that as comfort levels get too great, somebody can say, hey, wait a minute, gang, what's going on here?
What is CalPERS' responsibility to the public, and how do you weigh that as a board member, should you be elected to that position? How do you weigh that against your fiduciary responsibility to members?
Well, your primary fiduciary obligation is obviously the members, as you identified. But we also have an obligation to run the system efficiently to maximize return within an acceptable level of risk, because we also have an obligation to hold the costs down for a couple of reasons. One, because the Constitution gives us that obligation. But two, if we're going to defend public employee pensions, and believe me, I will do my best to do that, we also have to be aware that the people who are paying for it want to keep the costs as low as possible. So that's something you really do have to be aware of. One of the other things I think we need to do, not just for the public, but for the public, all working people, really, we need to become advocates for returning defined benefits to everybody. Because we can't sit there as an island and without expecting to get pot shots taken at us. So I really think those are kind of the real obligations, to hold it down and to educate the public and make them understand what is going on as much as possible. Public employees, by and large, have made a trade-off of current compensation for deferred compensation, and there are constantly proposals to change that deal. And if the public ultimately decides to change the deal, then one of the things I think the public has to be aware of in making that decision is that if I'm no longer getting the deferred comp, I'm going to want the current comp.